Trees planted by streams of water, chaff blown away by the wind, shrubs in the desert, trees planted by water. In turbulent times, where do we find stability? In liminal seasons, what do we trust? In changing days, how do we hold on? The prophet Jeremiah lived through a most turbulent time in ancient Judah. From the glory days of King Josiah to the devastation of the Babylonian exile, Jeremiah lived and worked through the best of times and the worst of times. And his preaching reflected the changing circumstances, moving from judgment to hope, from a critique of political ambition and overconfidence to comfort for a broken and despairing people. Finding stability amidst massive disruption was a major concern. Questions of who to trust, what to trust, how to hold on when all had been lost. These were acute questions, even painful ones, certainly fearful ones. And as was common with prophets, Jeremiah's answers were often expressed through poetic imagery and analogy, like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. Psalm 1 uses the same poetic imagery as Jeremiah, though it comes from a much later time in Israel's history. Psalm 1 sets the tone for the whole book of Psalms, placed as a kind of introduction to how we're going to live now in the time of restoration to Jerusalem following the Babylonian exile. Unlike the before times, Judah remained under the control of a colonial power. Persia was just a nicer colonial power than Babylon. And Persia had a different strategy for staying in control, for managing the empire. You can, indeed you should, return to your historical territory, Persian King Darius decreed. Rebuild your temple and rebuild your lives, and your traditional laws will be the law of the land in your place. This was good news indeed. It was not, however, the same as political independence. It was better than a life of exile in a foreign land. But the line of David was not restored. The law, therefore, took on new meaning. To follow the law of the Lord was to follow the law of the new empire. And having so recently returned from half a century of exile, God's people and their leaders were strongly motivated to avoid upsetting their new overlords. Happy are they who delight in the law of the Lord, indeed. It is the law of the king as well. We know something about turbulence and disruption, perhaps even exile. And perhaps we even know something of devastation and despair in these last years. Certainly, we know uncertainty, the feeling of being blown around like a shrub in the desert, like chaff on the wind. I don't think I was alone last fall in thinking, hoping, even expecting that we were near the end of this pandemic and all that it has meant. And then Omicron, a word few of us even knew before December. Omicron exploded and our society with it, like an all too real bad dream. Whether or not we agree with the protests and blockades that currently adding to our societal chaos, an expression of the societal chaos. But we know the feelings of powerlessness, of frustration, of fed upness, those feelings that are fueling those things. It is into that kind of frustration and despair and uncertainty that our poets today speak. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. Happy are they who delight in the law of the Lord. They are like trees planted by streams of water. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots to the stream. Now, addressing the big questions of our societal disruption is kind of above my pay grade. What we can do and what we have been doing together as a community is to consider how we will live here at St. George's? What are the contours of the stream of water by which we are planted? From what can we and do we draw stability, happiness, life? Throughout January, 14 different parish groups spent time reflecting on our life together, discussing what matters most to us, our values. 78 different people participated, several in more than one group. By far, the core value chosen most often was community. It was described as a kind of alpha value, always at the top of the list, a support system that allows all the other listed values to happen. More than a value, perhaps, community is who we are, a community of love, seeking to follow the way of Christ through compassion, inclusion, making a difference, and learning. I'm just going to share my screen again to show you a draft, just a proposal, a draft summary of the reflection work that we have done. You'll note at the top that there's a statement of identity, who we are, and using a couple of different words. So it remains to be decided or to figure out how we will express it. Being St. George's as a community of love that seeks to, in different words, live a Christ-centered spirituality or to follow in the way of Christ in some specific ways, through compassion, inclusion, making a difference, and learning. So some of the sentences or descriptions to flesh out, or to begin to flesh out some of those values. Compassion being supporting one another and the broader community in active ways, especially through life events and life changes. Inclusion being welcoming, including, and affirming all manner of people, regardless of age, race, beliefs, sexual orientation, gender identity, or ability. We make a difference working together on behalf of others for the common good towards common goals. And learning, when we are experiencing new things, moving to the edge of our comfort zone and beyond. As I said, this is a draft, a proposal of sorts. And we will be discussing it at the beginning of our parish council meeting this coming Tuesday. If you would like, we welcome and invite you, whether you're on parish council or not, to join in that discussion. If you'd like to, all you have to do is ask Vicky or one of anybody who is in leadership, and we will share the Zoom link. We'll be on Zoom with you for the first part of that meeting, where we kind of discuss and in particular to think about, how does this land? Do you hear the conversations you were a part of reflected in this kind of statement of who we are and what we hold most important? After parish council later next week, a copy will be sent, or perhaps something different will be sent to you via kind of setting sail, and perhaps have another opportunity for discussion. And then we'll seek some kind of provisional approval at the AGM, which is, as you heard at the beginning, in 2 weeks' time. This summary statement of our identity and values, who we are and what we hold most important, is seeking to describe the stream of water by which we are planted, to talk about the nutrients, the sort of molecular makeup of the water that we understand to be most important to us as we practice community. It's a little different than a grand vision. It's a framework against which we can hold issues and opportunities to help us decide what to do and what not to do. It's an expression of the source of our stability in the midst of change, offering principles to guide our behavior. It is not an end point, but a waypoint, a water source from which we can grow. In a leadership discussion late last week, for instance, Gary was already thinking about how we could live out these values, how we do and how we could, both internally in the community of St. George's and externally with the greater community. thinking about our context, who we serve. And it's the kind of mapping, thinking those things through, that can help us decide where we want to focus our energy, how we trust in the Lord, as Jeremiah implores us. I'm just going to, okay, we're going to leave it. I was going to continue. The work for the next year will focus on reconnecting, rebuilding, regathering the community, our community. My hope is that we will spend some time overtly outlining ways in which our behavior supports or not St. George's community. Part of our valuing of community is taking responsibility for it. So as Joy mentioned off the top, in the next 2 weeks, we are actively looking to identify the people who are called to leadership in the community as wardens, as parish council members, and as synod delegates. Without people to fill those roles in the community, there is no community. Without community leaders, we're like a shrub in the desert, blown around, blown away like chaff on the wind. On the other hand, saying yes to the risk of leadership is an important part of actively supporting the community we love, and is indeed an expression of community itself, as we work in a team, that no one is alone in this. And we do that so that we can be that tree planted by streams of water, blessed as we trust in the Lord.